I wanted to teach children, and they said, why not come along? So I first started off doing afternoons, and then I took over the mornings and did whole days. But I only worked 3 days a week at kindergarten, and the other 2 I looked after American baby boy, which nobody seems to realise. It was very special to me.
How well are you coping with all the press attention?
Well, as you can see, you can tell.
Are you bearing up with it quite well, though? Because it must be quite a strain with all of us after you.
Well, it is, naturally.
And you're coping with it all right, though? You seem to be doing very well.
Well, I'm still around.
Is there any possibility of any announcement of your marriage in the near future? Can you tell me? Can you tell me if there's any possibility?
I'm not going to say anything, please.
Right, but Prince Charles did give us a hint himself. He said we wouldn't have to wait too long.
Hey.
My years at Westheath were certainly very happy ones indeed. I made many friends who I often see, and in spite of what Miss Rudge and my other teachers may have thought at the time, I did actually learn something. So you would never have known by my O-level results.
Can you take us back to when you first met? If you can remember. Can you remember when you first met?
Yes, certainly can. It was 1977 that Charles came to stay as a friend of my sister Sarah's for a shoot. We sort of met in a ploughed field.
Slightly previous to that, I know.
And what did you think then? What was your instant impression, both of you? What did you think about Lady Diana then?
Well, I remember thinking what a very jolly and amusing and attractive 16-year-old she was. And having great fun and bouncy and full of life and everything. And I don't know what you thought of me.
Pretty amazing.
Did it cross either of your minds that in 3 years' time you would be announcing your engagement, thinking of getting married?
No.
No.
Not at all.
No, Diana wasn't prepared for overnight stardom. Nobody is. You know, she was a country girl. She was very naive. She'd never even had a proper boyfriend. There's nobody helped her. Nobody told her because this was the first time it had happened.
The Princess of Wales was a new kind of royal. She carried out her duties with elegance and style, just like other members of the royal family. But there was a difference. She wasn't stuffy, responding to people naturally, and the people took her to their hearts. She was happy to show the kind of human side that other royals kept hidden, giving the monarchy a refreshing new profile throughout the world.
Was that enjoyable, Mom?
But she could be embarrassed by the royal ordeal. In the early days, she was shy-die to the press, a girl who easily blushed. This proved to endear her to millions as she publicly learnt the protocols of royal life. It appeared that she didn't take long to learn. The endless handshakes during hundreds of walkabouts proved no problem to her. She always looked pleased to meet anyone, and the crowds were delighted to meet her. Before the eyes of the world, it seemed that the romantic schoolgirl had flowered into a serene, self-confident princess. But it was a veneer. In private, the princess was not living the fairy tale, and there were occasions when she let her composure slip. And the princess found it hard to suppress a girlish attack of giggles on seeing her husband in a hard hat. It seemed that Charles was not too amused.
Your wives always love Julie. They don't see you, do they?
Her larking with the Duchess of York on the ski slopes at Closters also caused much consternation. The Prince of Wales had been educated in maintaining the mystique of monarchy, and such high-spiritedness was anathema to this. It wasn't long after that speculation about the state of the marriage became a popular sport. And in 1992, Andrew Morton published Diana, Her True Story, which exploded onto the world's front pages. The book claimed that the princess was desperately unhappy, a prisoner in a gilded cage, locked in a loveless marriage. Before she married Prince Charles, she was Lady Diana Spencer, an anonymous face in London's Bedsitter-land. She was 19 and very shy. She grew up at Park House on the royal estate at Sandringham. Prince Charles's younger brothers, Andrew and Edward, were frequent visitors to her home. She was sent to Riddlesworth Hall, where the girls were taught good manners.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Mrs. Wood. Good morning, Mr. Winter.
Good morning, everyone.
Her time there was marked by initial homesickness, and it also became apparent that Diana was not to excel in the classroom, but she enjoyed sport and was good at it. Her next school, too, Westheath in Kent, inspired no academic achievements, although she won prizes for her swimming prowess. And here she developed her love of dancing, learning ballet and tap, but any dreams of a professional career evaporated as she grew taller. As Princess of Wales, she made a joke of her school days and her lack of academic success. On a visit to Westheath 10 years later to open a new sports hall named after her former headmistress, she recalled past misdemeanours and the price she had to pay.
My years at Westheath were certainly very happy ones indeed. I made many friends who I often see, and in spite of what Miss Rudge and my other teachers may have thought at the time, I did actually learn something. So you would never have known by my O-level results. I cannot think of a better and more lasting memento to Miss Rudge's years at the school, both as teacher and headmistress, than this magnificent hall. Perhaps now, when future generations are handed out punishments for talking after lights, pillow fights, and illegal food, they will be told to run 6 times round this hall. It has to be preferable to the lacrosse pitch or weeding the garden, which I became a great expert at.
During her time at Westheath, her father had succeeded to the Spencer earldom and gone to live at Althorp Hall in Northamptonshire. He was married again by now to the former Lady Dartmouth. It was during a weekend house party that Prince Charles and Lady Diana took notice of each other for the first time.
It was 1977. Prince Charles came to stay as a friend of my sister Sarah's for a shoot. We sort of met in a ploughed field.
Well, I remember thinking what a very jolly and amusing and attractive 16-year-old she was. And having great fun and bouncy and full of life and everything. I think it gives one a very useful experience of responsibility and discipline. I think responsibility is the most important thing, is the actual trust that's put in you to deal with other people, and the feeling that they can perhaps put their trust in you as well.
When I joined Buckingham Palace way back in 1976, it was already rumoured that Prince of Wales would be marrying somebody like Princess Mary Astrid or Amanda Knatchbull. There were rumours that he would be marrying somebody else. Lady Diana Spencer was never there. There were always suitors around Prince Charles. He was the most eligible bachelor in the world at that time, heir to the throne of England. So he was never short of female companions. I saw him occasionally with the Queen. He'd stay at Buckingham Palace. His suite of rooms were at the palace. He had his own valet. He had his own household. And he was very independent. Really, he was searching for someone who could provide him with an heir and a spare. That was his main priority. He was getting old. And the Queen had said to him, "Isn't it about time you settled down, Charles? Isn't it about time you made us grandparents?" So his time was right when Lady Diana Spencer came into his vision.
Well, Charles and Diana met when Diana was still a teenager. She was very young at the time. In fact, her older sister had been cherry-picked as a potential suitor for Prince Charles and had in fact dated. Sarah and Charles did date, but it was Diana, who I think was only 17 or 18 at the time, who caught Prince Charles's eye, and he saw this incredibly beautiful, doe-eyed, stunning blonde who caught his eye, and actually he decided that she was the one he wanted to see, not the older sister.
Diana was invited to spend a weekend as a companion, really. So not really a date, but just someone to be around Charles who was amusing, at the home of someone called Philippa de Pass. And he'd just broken up with his girlfriend, Anna Wallace, and he'd just been to Lord Mountbatten's funeral. And he, Lord Mountbatten was probably the closest person to him, and Diana said to him, "You look so sad. You look so sad and so alone." And he sort of jumped on her, as it were. That's it, in her. She said she couldn't believe it. I mean, she was so naive and so innocent. And then she was invited on board Britannia for Cowes Week. And then she was invited to Balmoral. So it was, it was a steady but quite fast introduction.
In the summer of 1980, the Queen told me that a young girl was coming to stay for the weekend. "Will you meet her at the front door and show her a room?" "Of course, Your Majesty." So I'm standing in the front hallway of Balmoral Castle on the black and white tiles, waiting for this car to arrive. And out of the car comes a shy young girl that nobody knew who she was. She had one little suitcase in the back.
Very generous. A very good friend.
Did you watch TV a lot? Did you have any favourite programmes?
Oh, God. Crossroads.
Did you share that like?
Unfortunately, yes.
She was working at the time of the press interest in her and Prince Charles. She'd moved on from working as a nanny, and she was working as a school teacher at a school in Pimlico. And she was looking after, very young children, really, not really teaching them, but just looking after them.
Is there any possibility of any announcement of your marriage in the near future? Can you tell me? Can you tell me if there's any possibility?
But I'm not going to say anything, afraid.
Right, but Prince Charles did give us a hint himself. He said we wouldn't have to wait too long.
Just as Charles fell immediately in love with Princess Diana, or Lady Diana Spencer as she was at the time, so too did Britain. We hadn't seen the likes of a future princess like this for many, many years, and Diana was just a stunner. I mean, that picture that Arthur Edwards took of her coming out of her nursery in that see-through dress, that set of pins that she sported, the innocence about her, you just thought, wow, this girl is a knockout.
The press started camping out on the doorstep, 40 or 50 of them. And this had never happened to a member of the royal family before. And they followed her everywhere. So it was relentless, and she handled it beautifully, but mentally it was really getting to her.
What happened with the princess was she came to us at a romantic, new, fresh time into the royal family. She came to save it in a way, because it was on the decline. Her involvement in the royal family boosted the royal family's popularity, lifted the royal family.
No, Diana wasn't prepared for overnight stardom. Nobody is. She was a country girl. She was very naive. She'd never even had a proper boyfriend. So she wasn't remotely prepared for that kind of stardom, and it was frightening. It was really frightening. I mean, she was absolutely sweet, and she chatted to photographers and just carried on her everyday business as best she could, but she wasn't remotely prepared for it. There's nobody helped her, nobody told her, because this was the first time it had happened.
How well are you coping with all the press attention?
Well, as you can see, you can tell.
Are you bearing up with it quite well, though? Because it must be quite a strain with all of us after you.
Well, it is, naturally.
You're coping with it all right, though? You seem to be doing very well.
Well, I'm still around.
Well, when Prince Charles asked Diana to marry him, he said to her, do realise that one day you'll be queen? And Diana says, I knew I wouldn't be queen, but I don't see how she could possibly have known that. In retrospect, she says, I knew I wouldn't be queen, but I don't think it really sank in. She was very naive, and I think she thought, oh, one day I'll be queen, fine. But I think it was really more the pressure of being on such public display that got to her, and I think that's the pressure that gets to every girl that marries into the royal family. But no one had ever experienced this before. Diana was the first one. And I remember the Queen sort of saying, it's just because she's young and new and it'll all calm down. Because it never calmed down, it just got worse. So she was under a lot of pressure. Well, the cracks in their relationship, I think they began to show very quickly. Because Diana didn't understand, after she became engaged to Prince Charles, he never seemed to be around. He was always so busy. And she was moved into Buckingham Palace, and she had her own apartment there, and he was sort of down the corridor. And she was absolutely on her own. I mean, a friend of mine actually was her footman and told me a lot about her at the time. And she was very lonely. She didn't feel she could have her girlfriends there. And I mean, Buckingham Palace is quite a strange place for a teenage girl to be incarcerated, which is really what she was.
Well, I think everyone remembers Charles and Diana's wedding as this fairy tale. I think even the Archbishop of Canterbury at the time referred to it as such. Obviously quite 80s heavy when you think about Diana's huge meringue-esque gown and all of the people in attendance, and obviously the romantic venue that was St Paul's Cathedral at the time. And this was an event watched by a global audience of multi-millions, so it was a major, major royal occasion.
Everyone watched the engagement footage. Everyone around the world, pretty much, tuned into the royal wedding. I mean, that was a huge event in '81. The fairy tale dress, the golden carriage, the beautiful ceremony at St Paul's, the blushing bride, the proud prince. It just ticked all the boxes. It was the fairy tale wedding, or so we all thought.
Happy and you know, and you really want to show that if you're happy and you know it's happy hands.
Very well, thank you. I'd just like to say a word. May I say a word?
Please do.
Yes. The Spencers have, through the centuries, fought for their king and country. Today, Diana is vowing to help her country for the rest of her life. She will be following in the tradition of her ancestors, and she will have at her side the man she loves.
I think Diana had terrible jitters on her wedding day. In fact, the night before, she'd wanted to get out of the whole thing. And she'd had a sort of funny, jokey evening with her sisters. And they said, Dutch, you can't get out of it now, because they used to call her Dutch, short for Duchess. You can't get out of it now, your face is on the tea towels. And that made her laugh. But she'd discovered about Camilla. She discovered that Charles was giving her gifts. And she didn't know the half of it, but she knew that Camilla was a very important person in her fiancé's life. And she says she became obsessed, absolutely obsessed, so that when she was walking down the aisle, she spotted Camilla in the congregation. But she said what sort of helped her at that moment was concentrating on her father, because he'd just had a stroke, and she was really, and he's a very big man, and she was really guiding her father.
Charles Philip Arthur George, wilt thou have this woman to thy wedded wife, to live together after God's ordinance in the holy estate of matrimony? Wilt thou love her, comfort her, honor and keep her in sickness and in health, and forsaking all other, keep thee only unto her, so long as ye both shall live?
I will.
Diana Francis, wilt thou have this man to thy wedded husband, to live together according to God's law in the holy estate of matrimony? Wilt thou love him, comfort him, honor and keep him in sickness and in health, and forsaking all other, keep thee only unto him, so long as ye both shall live?
I will.
Bless, O Lord, this ring, and grant that he who gives it and she who shall wear it may remain faithful to each other and abide in thy peace and favor, and live together in love until their lives end. Through Jesus Christ our Lord.
Amen.
With this ring, I thee wed.
I thee wed.
With my body,
I
thee honor.
I thee honor.
And all my worldly goods with thee I share.
All thy goods with thee I share.
In the name of the Father,
in the name of the Father,
and of the Son,
and of the Son,
and of the Holy Ghost,
and of the Holy Ghost.
Amen.
Amen.
For as much as Charles Philip Arthur George and Diana Francis have consented together in holy wedlock, and have witnessed the same before God and this company, and thereto have given and pledged their troth either to other, and have declared the same by giving and receiving of a ring and by joining of hands, I pronounce that they be man and wife together, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Here is the stuff of which fairy tales are made. The prince and princess on their wedding day.
The princess was brimming with hope and love for the future. She fell in love with her prince. And there they were, a golden couple. I remember the wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer very well because I was at Buckingham Palace. I was working for the Queen, and the Queen said to me, "You can watch it on my telly. So take the corgis for a walk in the garden and then watch the telly and you'll know when we're coming back." I was responsible for the top table, which was the bride's table, the bride and groom, and of course the Queen and Prince Philip, and the bridesmaids. So I was waiting for the bride to come back. She'd appeared on the balcony of Buckingham Palace. And then, at the end of a very long red carpeted corridor, I noticed this ball of white racing towards me. And I realized it was Princess Diana. She'd rolled her train up into a ball, tucked it under her arm. She had her slippers in one hand, and she was racing down this corridor, lined with windows. And the diamonds of the Spencer family tiara were glinting in the sunshine. And she was racing towards me. Just me and her in one corridor. She was like a galleon in full sail. What a picture of hope and happiness and love. She had it all. And that day, I waited the wedding breakfast in the ball supper room, served the Queen and the bride refused everything. She didn't eat a morsel. And she said to me later, "I couldn't eat a thing, Paul. My stomach was in knots." I was just totally wound up by the day, by the excitement, by the spectacle. She says, "But you know, the most wonderful thing was walking down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral with my father." She says, "But did you ever look at the footage of that?" I said, "I've seen it many times." She says, "Next time you look at it, watch me." She says, "Can't you see me looking from side to side? Can you see me doing that? Do you know what I'm doing? I'm looking for her. I'm looking for Camilla." And she was there.
Princess Diana, like the rest of the world, was caught up in the fairy tale that was her own royal relationship, and she was willing it to work, as was everyone else. Actually, the reality behind Palace Gates is that pretty quickly it had started falling apart.
I haven't yet worked out a method of splitting my wife in half. She can do both sides.
In the early days, Diana's light was small, but it began to shine brighter and brighter and brighter. And it was a sort of a Star is Born situation. Prince Charles would say to her, "Well, I married you, I made you a princess. You weren't born royal. This is a man who's been born to be king. This is a man who's been treated from the very beginning as a god. Suddenly being eclipsed by this woman, he wasn't very happy." He'd also courted her older sister, of course. Sarah had been a suitor, and on Diana's wedding day, her sister, Sarah, turned to her and said, I thought all this was going to be mine one day, and now it's yours. There was sibling rivalry in the Spencer household. Diana wasn't meant to achieve. The fact that Diana became Princess of Wales, probably future Queen of England, was beyond the Spencer family to comprehend. It wasn't for her to achieve. The brother should have achieved. It's his estate, not Diana's. So there was always some jealousy coming from the Spencers.
Madam, how are you enjoying married life?
Highly recommend.
How do you like Balmoral as a place?
Lovely.
Yeah.
Have you cooked a breakfast yet?
I don't eat breakfast.
Well, Diana made it very clear that she felt like a fish out of water. Even before her actual wedding, she said she spent those nights before her wedding at Clarence House, which was then the Queen Mother's residence. And the night before her wedding was one of the most miserable of her life. She recalls how she felt completely isolated, you know, the images of the princess trapped in the tower.
Well, I think now when we reflect on it and after we've seen interviews that Diana gave subsequently, we know that she was extremely ill-prepared for married life into the royal family, and she felt enormous pressure from day one. Even when they were discussing the engagement and the wedding plans, I think the pressure started to build on her. The media scrutiny of Lady Di, as she was then, I think, played foremost on her mind. She didn't know how she needed to behave. And when she actually entered married life, she found it a very lonely experience. Charles was off enjoying his country pursuits, and she felt that she was left rather in a world she didn't recognise, a modern woman in quite an old school environment of Buckingham Palace, essentially feeling like a spare part.
I think she felt isolated, and I don't think that the palace were prepared for someone who perhaps didn't have that royal training to marry into the royal family and to become a future queen. She was the Princess of Wales. She became famous overnight, and she didn't really have the tools to equip her for such immediate stardom. If you look at how the palace helped integrate Kate Middleton, as she was then, into the royal family over that decade-long courtship, Kate was trained to deal with the paparazzi. She was trained not to speak to the press. You know, she had a lot of hand-holding, and she had an incredible mentor in William. I don't think Charles gave Diana the guidance that she needed, and I certainly don't think the courtiers at the palace did. She was really left to sink or swim.
Living and working with the Queen was far more easy than living with Diana. With the Queen, we always knew that her life ran with routines and protocols and timetables. We knew that breakfast would be 9 o'clock, lunch would be 1 o'clock, tea would be 5 o'clock, and dinner would be 8:15. It was the same every day. It's Groundhog Day at Buckingham Palace. Buckingham Palace is a very large house, has over 200 members of staff, and a hierarchy below stairs that you wouldn't believe, with titles that go way back into the 1600s. So you have fendersmiths, you have women of the bedchamber, you have pages of the presence, and you have pages of the backstairs. You have footmen, you have yeomen of the glass pantry and yeomen of the silver pantry. So all these titles, and people know what they're doing. They all have a specific job. I knew what I was doing at Buckingham Palace. From first thing in the morning till last thing at night, it runs like clockwork. It's never been changed. If Queen Victoria went back to Buckingham Palace tomorrow, she wouldn't be surprised by anything. It's exactly the same. Nothing changes at Buckingham Palace. Everything runs smoothly. With Diana, anything could happen. No routine, no timetables, nothing. We might skip lunch, we might be shopping, we could be doing anything during the day. So life was more exciting with Diana. But the difference between the two worlds was I always knew where I was with the Queen. I always knew where the line was in the sand. I knew when not to cross that line, and I knew to stay and bow. I was a servant, but also a friend and confidant to the Queen, but in a different way. With Diana, it was have a cup of tea with me, have a cup of coffee. Don't just stand there. I used to stand every morning waiting for the princess to come through from her dressing room. And every morning, standing there with half a grapefruit and a cup of black coffee, I'd bow and say, "Good morning, Your Royal Highness." "For goodness sake," she'd say, "when are you going to stop doing that? It's just me and you in the room. Sit down, have a cup of coffee with me and tell me what's been going on." That was her world. I personally think that Diana fell in love with Prince Charles. It's obvious to me that she was a young, naive girl and she fell in love with the prince. Years later, she said to me, "Well, yes, I kissed a frog. I found a toad." That was my story. But she did fall in love with him, and those two boys are born out of love.
I saw correspondence between them. I saw correspondence from the princess to the Queen, which said how happy she was and how she loved to be a wife and how much she would support Charles in his future career. They were her views, but times changed. Within 1 year, she had William, and then Harry came along. And so the first 5 years of the princess's marriage, she felt that she could make it work.
I think there is this image that Princess Diana created, that she felt that she was completely isolated from the rest of royal life, possibly by her age. She was a young 20-something, surrounded by who she described as men in grey suits, you know, the powers that be at the palace. There's an image she created of herself sort of walking around the palace corridors with a Walkman on, sort of rather detached from the rest of the scene. So I think she felt she was thrown into the deep end, wasn't given much coaching. It's not like, say, for instance, William and Kate, where they lived together for a decade before she becomes a royal wife. She barely really knew Charles, if you reflect on it. They'd only met, you know, a dozen or so times. So actually, it was straight in at the heavy wedge of it from the very beginning.
Good luck, and I hope everything goes well, and how lucky you are to be engaged to such a lovely lady. And my goodness, I was lucky enough to marry her. And we had many messages. It's amazing what ladies do when your back's turned.
The cameras often caught touches of tenderness between them in the earlier days. No matter how public the occasion, it seemed that Prince Charles had finally met the girl of his dreams, and they didn't try to conceal their feelings for each other. It appeared that the couple were very much in love. In September 1984, their second child was born, Prince Harry. In the 2 years since William had come into the world, Princess Diana had matured. She was now relaxed and confident, both as a princess and as a mother. But all was not as it seemed. It's since been revealed that the princess was suffering from an eating disorder, bulimia nervosa, a complaint caused by stress. The public glimpsed that something was wrong when she fainted during a visit to an exhibition in Canada. The prince made light of her predicament.
It's really entirely due to the extremely advantageous conditions that pertain in British Columbia, the weather, and the general fertile conditions which have ensured that she's about to have sextuplets, which is really why she fainted. It's not actually true, but there we are.
The children were growing up. William began his first day at school. The children didn't always behave in a royal way. This was Harry. It was soon Prince Harry's first day at kindergarten too, and as well as his parents, William was there to give his brother support. The royal wave still needed development. The Princess was carrying out more and more official engagements on her own. Her interests were with the very young and the very old, and those in hospitals and hospices. Sometimes she was called upon to try out equipment herself. This machine tests lung performance. She became more involved with the serious aspects of royal patronage, willing to visit the less fortunate and give them encouragement. She was patron of Turning Point, an organisation that helps the mentally handicapped, as well as people recovering from drug or alcohol addiction. Her most publicised crusade was to dispel fears of contact with AIDS victims. On her many trips to open new wards devoted to the treatment of sufferers, she made a point of shaking hands with and talking to the patients. Drug abuse was another of her concerns. She wanted to be involved in the fight against it and spoke of the problem in Newcastle.
We have a battle on our hands. It has to be waged on two major fronts: prevention and cure. As far as prevention is concerned, parents and teachers are in the front line. As a parent myself, I'm only too aware of the responsibility this implies in terms of the kind of upbringing best suited to encourage the child to say no.
She also showed great concern for the deaf. Her attentiveness at this school was not an act. She could both understand and communicate in signing language, another indication of the seriousness she applied to her role. Her courage and compassion were obvious wherever she went. This was an Indonesian leprosy hospital, where her refusal to worry about close contact with patients was reckoned to have helped change attitudes to the disfiguring disease. She also boosted the morale of the soldiers serving in Northern Ireland. She went to Londonderry to visit the Royal Hampshire Regiment, one of the regiments of which she was Colonel-in-Chief. Even in full combat gear, the Princess managed to look glamorous, providing a welcome relief for the men used to the daily dangers of serving in the troubled province. Although an obvious target herself, the Princess seemed to shrug off any fears. During the time of the Gulf War, she was there to give support to the wives and children of servicemen fighting in the desert. And she chatted to the fighting men who would soon be on their way to take up arms against the Iraqis. She gave great comfort to many during frightening times. And it wasn't only the British troops who idolized her. Out in the sands of Kuwait, the American forces had also made her their pin-up.
Is there any possibility of any announcement of your marriage in the near future? Can you tell me? Can you tell me if there's any possibility?
I'm not going to say anything, please.
Right, but Prince Charles did give us a hint himself. He said we wouldn't have to wait too long. How well are you coping with all the press attention?
Well, as you can see, you can tell.
Are you bearing up with it quite well, though? Because it must be quite a strain with all of us now.
Well, it is, naturally.
And you're coping with it all right, though? You seem to be doing very well.
Well, I'm still around.
Enjoyable, Mark.
Hello.